Welcome everyone to April's NancyTalk. This month we have Coach Eric Baker as our guest speaker. Take it away, Coach Eric.
Thanks, Siraj. Hi. Yeah, I'm Eric. So, yeah, like today, like I plan on just kind of just talking about myself and the crazy circumstances that have helped me through my SCI journey and the weird things I've picked up along the way. And hopefully, like my four main takeaways that I'm gonna kind of like clip throughout my like story is like I hope that we leave here with like an understanding of like how to like master and be really understanding of like our controllables, like things that are like within our sphere of influence, and like learning how to laugh while we learn, and like finding the people that can see you. And by you, I mean you, not your circumstances, your body, anything like that, who you are. Because like those three things I think have been the most impactful for me throughout my life. But to start the journey, like I have to kind of tell you a little bit more about my background. So like I'm originally from Central California, which I know we're on the East Coast. And when I say Central California, you guys probably think like San Francisco. But Central California is like, it might as well be the Midwest. Like it is the middle of nowhere. Like I grew up in between orchards. Like, and I'm the youngest of four boys. So I had three older brothers and two parents that like worked like 60 hours a week. So there wasn't a ton of parental supervision, which led to a lot of fun injuries that happened growing up. So lots of scraped knees, lots of, broken wrists, broken feet, broken whatever. So like getting hurt was just like a borderline daily occurrence, which is, and I'm saying this in the weirdest positive light ever, because like the act of getting hurt so often really shaped my perspective on what happens when you get hurt. So like my older brothers, we are all wild, like riding dirt bikes and go-karts, and our favorite sport to play after school was a game we came up with called dirt bike dodgeball. And as you can imagine, it's not NCAA sport for a reason, because it's really stupid. Where you just throw balls at people on dirt bikes. And those interactions really helped me understand how to like accept something, how to accept like circumstances, and really made me understand the oh shit moment when like you're riding a dirt bike at full speed and you see a basketball about to hit you in the face, and there's that like as time slows down and you're just like, oh shit, and then you get hit and you flip off and you're bleeding and everything hurts and you're just like, okay, like what do I do now, but that being paired with like my parents, who worked so much and were really good at their jobs and were so dedicated to what they were doing, really modeled, like instilled that idea of like, regardless of the situation, you figure out a way to make it work for you. So when I got hurt, growing up playing, I was lucky enough to play so many sports. Like ended up landing on swimming and water polo as like my go-to sports, which was how I got hurt. I slipped when diving in at a water polo tournament, hit the bottom and broke C6, C7. And in a weird retrospect, I remember very quickly like still laying in a hospital bed, still intubated, but like conscious, going and hearing the doctor say like, "Oh, you're paralyzed," and me going, like, okay, and almost like in the moment, accepting it because I was just like, "Oh, this is just another injury. Like this is just what it is. Like, okay, what do we do next?" You know, that very simple, the same mindset of taking a basketball to the face, playing dirt bike dodgeball, or, you know, my brother's beating me up for some unknown reason. Like, just accepting it and like realizing that like no amount of crying is going to make my knee stop bleeding, and no amount of being upset is going to, you know, put my bones back into place or allow me to go back in time to not get hit in the face by a basketball. Like, you know, it's just really understanding that like it is what it is. Okay, what's the next thing we can do? And then switching over to the skills that my parents taught me, which was like, okay, this is what I have to do now. How can I work? Where can I put my effort? Where can I work? And like, thankfully that was in like rehab. And I had like really being able to be in a space where like rehab hospitals are great because it's kind of a like insulated space where the things you have control over are very clear. You know, you have control over your rehab sessions, you have control over what you're working on and your goals going forward. And it's really, really good practice before stuff gets weird and complicated when you're out of rehab. So like really understanding of like, okay, this is what I have control over. I have control over my PT. And okay, cool, we're gonna go there. We're gonna go there and we're gonna kill ourselves for the next 2 hours in PT. And we're gonna work really, really hard because that's all I have control over right now. Because when I first got hurt, I had a C-level spinal cord injury. I could barely move. Like I couldn't push my chair. I couldn't do anything like that. And so really focusing on those things was very, very helpful. But to give grace and give flowers to my PTs, OTs, because they very quickly realized who I was. Not, like I wasn't my diagnosis. Like, which to give them even more like grace, because I was their first spinal cord injury in 10 years. Like I was at a pediatric spinal cord injury. I got hurt the day before I turned 17. So I joked that I didn't have a 17th birthday because I was asleep. So the papers may say I'm 34, but your boy's 33. So like they quickly realized like, oh, he got hurt playing water polo. And then talking to me, they realized that I loved sports. I was an athlete, and they were smart enough to change it from saying I have physical therapy to saying like twice a day you have practice. And that simple reframing of it really allowed me to maintain who I was, you know, and really helped me understand that like I am not like my injury. So just like a simple like exercise that I like to do with lots of groups of people is like, if you're capable, like for like a second, like point to where on your body you are. It's a weird question, but take a second, think about it, and I want you to like tap where on your body you are. Okay, we're like split 50-50 between like heart and head. Like, so, yeah, like, and that's kind of about right? Like, the way I internalized it, and the way I still internalize it, the way I describe it to people is that like, I'm up here, like, this is the cockpit, and the rest of this is just a weird, like, flesh mech. Like, it may be like side effect of growing up in like the Megazord and like like all those Saturday morning cartoon eras where it's like I'm just controlling this Gundam, you know, and it just happened that my Gundam's electrical system's broken. Like, and so it really helped me realize that, like, with that realization, it's like, oh, I haven't changed. I'm still me. I'm still the younger brother of 3 older brothers. I'm still the son of my parents. I'm still the sarcastic athlete that, you know, like, I'm the sarcastic athlete that didn't get rescued from the pool for 2 minutes because with my personality, all my teammates thought I was joking. So I got to float in the pool on my belly for 2 minutes because they were like, that jokester, he's kidding, it's fine, you know, like that's still me. And that simple realization is incredibly helpful when processing dramatic change and trauma, because it means that, like, going forward, whereas like you are not your injury, additionally you are not your frustrations, and your frustrations are not with yourself. And some of you may have heard it earlier, like, I named my legs because I spasmed so much that I needed something to yell at when they were frustrating me. So, like, we have, like, Tyson's my right leg, Tony's my left leg, because Tony listens to me a little bit better and Tyson likes to kick things. Like, and so when I am struggling so much on some days with my legs, you know, they're spasming so much or getting in the way or just being annoying, I can look at my legs and be like, yo, Tyson, stop. Like, you know, and like externalize that frustration and realize it's like, I'm not frustrated with me. I'm frustrated with my stupid leg that won't stop spasming, you know, and, like, you know, it helped kind of protect myself a little bit more. And, like, that alone was crazy help. And I've carried that going forward because, like, you know, I've moved and bounced around a lot. And when encountering frustrations, it's really, really easy to, you know, get to a corner, realize there's no curb cut, and be frustrated that I can't take a step down. Instead of the actual problem is that, like, my frustration is with the fact that the city didn't put a curb cut here. Like, it's not a frustration with me, it's a frustration with something else that's not, you know, that's not in my control. You want to be frustrated with something that you have control over, but a lot of the frustrations with spinal cord injuries are stuff that you don't have control over. And learning to, like, be appropriately mad at them when it best suits you. So it's really, like, that separation is nice, but at the same time you need, like, those spaces where you don't have those frustrations, and you have those groups where you're normal. And that's where, like finding your normal is, like, crazy important and crazy helpful. For me, it was finding adaptive sports, like playing, like I laugh that, like, 3 months after my injury, I'm looking at my best friends in the world and being 100% earnest with them, going, like, I need one of you to smack me because I feel too fresh. Like, I'm used to getting in, like, a borderline fist fight twice a day, playing water polo, that, like, not having a bruise and not feeling roughed up feels weird and I don't like it. So, like, I need contact. I need physical contact. And again, like, that's going back to finding the people that see you. Because my recreational therapist, like, day 5 of her meeting me, like, I'm still in a C collar. Like, I can barely scratch my own nose. She's going, like, here's a documentary called Murderball. You should watch this. And it's 3 minutes in the documentary, there's 2 quadriplegics knocking each other out of their chairs, and it's me going, like, done, sold. Where do I show up? And very fittingly, she nailed it. As soon as I hit somebody with my chair for the first time, I was like, game over. This is my life now. Cool. You know, but more importantly, walking into that room with 15 other quads that have been quads for, the oldest one had been a quad for like 30 years. As a 17-year-old, it was like the first time where I was like, oh, like feeling the weight lift off of being the odd one out in a room and like instantly being normal with everyone else again. It was like being able to breathe again for the first time, where you're not explaining yourself. You're not the different person. You're not, isolated. Even if the people in the room don't realize you're isolated, if you are the only person sitting in a room, it's pretty obvious there's something different. But being in that space with my people, I found my normal, which made things easy. And you find your normal, and it makes things easy, and you're able to communicate easy, and you share the same language with people, and you don't have to think before you talk, and you don't have to explain the things you say, and things like that. Like, that is just like eye-opening, which is why like I work in the field I work in now with kids with disabilities, and getting them into sport, and teaching them sports and building programs up because of that experience I had as a 17-year-old of being like going from I don't know, I'm figuring all this out on my own, to suddenly being in a room where every week I showed up to practice with a written checklist of going, I just roll in, be like, what's up guys? Okay, flip it over. How do you tie your shoes? Somebody teach me how to tie my shoes. And just being able to just guilt-free ask questions to people that have been doing it for years and decades, and just learning and absorbing all their knowledge and figuring out how they do things. It was so freeing. And that being in that group of guys and girls gave me the confidence to feel like I could go wherever. If I could work with these people and learn from these people and build off of their experiences, then I could do whatever I wanted. And that normalcy in those normal spaces is so critical. So it's it's really important that we find our normal. And it could be here, it could be support groups, it could be, dance teams, whatever feels normal and is fun and engaging, go for it. It doesn't have to be sports. That was just mine. And building, finding your normal and building confidence in those normal spaces allows you to go create more normal spaces. So in Central California, I was the first wheelchair user to coach a water polo team. So it's me as a wheelchair user with 20 high school boys, none of them with disabilities, me teaching them, and they became incredibly comfortable with my chair, and it became invisible. It did not matter. All that stems from the confidence I gained from those guys teaching me wheelchair rugby. And then I became the first wheelchair user that was a water polo referee. So now I'm seeing thousands of kids across a weekend, coaching them, giving them advice, and on top, going up to coaches before the game, hey, I can't sign numbers when I kick a kid out. Let the kids know that I'm going to yell out the number, and getting kids used to accommodations. It's a really small accommodation, but that became normal for them too. And those small changes that I've been able to do all stem back to just finding my people, finding a normal space, finding a place where I can ask questions, and building the confidence there. So that's so unbelievably important. And the more of those spaces we have, the greater the spider web kind of stems out, where it's thought of more often, and we don't have more instances where you get to a corner and there's no curb cut because somebody who was building that sidewalk knew somebody who was refereed by that one weird guy in the chair that would always yell out their numbers. It's just a thought that happens. And so it's just really thinking back and distilling all my stuff, it goes right back to that like normal spot, like where I got my confidence from, where I was able to find my footing after everything turned upside down. And like those group of guys also really instilled in me that idea, like laughing through failure. You know, like it like hit home perfectly of like when I was growing up. You know, you would fall, you'd scrape your knee, you would, you know, try a trick on a dirt bike and just absolutely whiff it, and you hit the ground and you laugh, and then you get back up and you try it again. And that like problem solving was like, I really like they did the exact same thing, but with like everyday like problem solving. Like my very first day of rugby, I showed up, like had yet to do weight transfer by myself, and the dude walks over and goes, "What's your level?" And I go, C6. And he was like, "Cool, you're going to transfer yourself into that rugby chair." And I'm like, "I don't know how." And he's like, "Sucks, you're going to do it." And I'm like, "What if I fall?" And he goes, "You brought both your parents. Like, we're not going to leave you on the ground. We'll pick you back up, put you back in your everyday chair, and you'll try it again." You know, and like that, like, you know, okay. And I fell like 8 times in different ways every single time. And half the times I lost a shoe in the process, or Tyson kneed me in the face because Tyson's a jerk. Like, you know, like, and you just fall, look at, okay, what happened? Oh, that's new, and laugh, and you get back up, and you try it again, and you try it again. And like, you know, and that became kind of a mantra. Like, when I got into track and field, like, I got my racer. It was paid for. It was first day. We just blocked it off in my living room, put on the Star Wars trilogy, and was like, cool. We have 7 hours to figure out how I'm going to get in this chair by myself. And me and my parents hung out, watched Star Wars, and I fell over and over and over, or I got stuck. You know, there's like, just transferring into a racing chair is weird. And it's like backwards, and it's not what you'd expect. And so many times my feet got crossed, or like I got like my feet were in the chair, but both my hands were on the floor. So like my butt is straight up in the air, and I'm just like, I don't even know how I got in this position. I don't know how to get out. And I can just call my dad and be like, "Hey, dude, help." Like, you know, and just taking the time and problem solving and figuring it out. And by the time I went off to go race at school, I could get in and out of my racing chair in 10 minutes, like no problem, right? But it all stems back to just like trying, failing, laughing, you know, making fun of yourself in the process. And it like was no different to, you know, me learning how to skateboard, or me learning how to do this or that, those, just having fun in the process of failing over and over and over and over again. And like that was what those guys showed me. It was like, oh, like this isn't anything different. Like your bike has just been taken apart and put back together in a weird way, and now it's called a wheelchair. Like, it's just, that's all it is. Like, your wheelchair is a BMX bike that somebody with dyslexia assembled. Like, the exact same thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I can deal with that. Like, that's very under control. Like, but, you know, it's a stigma behind it. Even as somebody that uses the wheelchair all the time, I had to learn to like deconstruct within myself and, you know, approach it from a fun direction, which is really, really incredibly valuable for me, and allowed me to get to the point where I was able to be independent. And like the credit goes back to like my parents' work ethic and me being able to like distill those controllables down to like really focus on the things I had control over and master those things I had control over, and step by step by step. And then when I got stuck, every Saturday I showed up with my list of like, guys, how do you do this? What is this? And to their credit, they gave great advice. not a lot. Some of it was unethical, but it was still incredibly valuable, and it worked, and it was super helpful to have those guys to refer to. But like, they allowed me to like get independent, to move and go away to college like 2 years after my injury. Like, I got hurt day before in my senior year, and I left for college like 18 months later, which was like I'm still amazed by it. Like, and it all comes back to that, just that like, okay, every day we're gonna figure out how to do, like today, all we're putting our shoes on. We're gonna figure out how to put our shoes on. Or, like, you know, tomorrow we're gonna figure out how to cook some eggs, and we're gonna burn a lot of eggs. But by the time we're done, those yolks are gonna be so over medium, it's gonna be insane. Like, but like just one thing at a time, and being really patient, and being forgiving myself, and laughing through all the things, and like when I'm frustrated, taking a step back and focusing on, like, again, like going back to those normal spaces when I am so frustrated and so done and hating everything. Like when I have burnt this egg for the 50th time and the house smells gross and I think the pan is ruined, like, okay, cool. I'm gonna go for a run. Like I may not be able to cook an egg, but I can push my chair very, very hard for a long time. I'm gonna go do that for 30 minutes and I'm gonna come back. You know, like, just like when I'm doing something I cannot control anymore, I'm gonna go do something I can control, and then returning to this thing later. When I'm not so mad, I'm burning eggs out of spite. Like, you know, and like that slow process helped me get to that point. But I think the final step I had to take to really understand and really be comfortable alone in a large group was that there's a lot of times once you finally get so independent, you, like, spinal cord injuries get so fiercely independent, so like aggressive about their independence, that they refuse help from anyone in any shape and form, which is admirable, right? It's like it takes a lot of gut and strength to get independent and to be able to handle your own business. But that still has a barrier between you and everyone around you. I'll never forget, like, the piece of advice I got when discussing this with one of my rugby friends. This guy got hurt in like the 70s. And he was like a little bit higher level than me, but like he would just say like he told me, he was like, a lot of times most people are looking to just do good and to help people, regardless of like circumstance, regardless of context, regardless of culture. People just want to help and look for a way to do good. So that person coming up and asking you if you need help, you're taking it as they think you can't do it, but they may be just looking for somebody to help, and you're kind of an easy target. So if you allow them to help you, like, that is kind of a gift to both of you. Like, you use a little bit less energy and they walk away feeling like they did something good today. And understanding that, like, requesting help and looking for help and allowing people to help you isn't an admission of weakness. It's like an admission of being part of something bigger than yourself. And allowing that help in forms connections, and those connections spread and is a net positive for everyone around that. And so it's like, it's important to be able to do it by yourself, but it's also important to connect with people and to, like, admit vulnerability, because you don't know what people are going through. And so that like the final thing for me to come to peace with my injury was that like that empathy for other people, of just being like, oh, like yes, I use a chair to get around now, but that is nothing compared to other struggles people may be going through. And realizing that, like, yes, it's very obvious and visually apparent, but like it pales in comparison to like other conflict and other struggles and things in just life, whether it be social and economic issues, cultural issues, like things like that are so big and so like crushing, that like usually the injury in a wheelchair falls behind as you kind of learn to think, like you move forward, you move past it, as it just becomes part of your life and your experience, and you start to conquer those bigger things. And so like that was like kind of the last shift for me. I don't know if that made sense, but like learning to think like of the chair is like, it's part of me. I haven't overcome it. It's part of how I navigate through those bigger issues, and realizing that like accepting help from people, it could be their way of navigating those bigger issues as well. And now, oh, we're on the same plane. We're both navigating these big issues, and the chair is just like whatever. And that was like my final thing of like overcoming it, is understanding that like, yes, my perspective is different now, and I'm okay with that. And now we're all on the same page attacking these big policy craziness that is this world we live in now is insane. So yeah, back to those key points that I think I got all of them, all 4 of them, of like really learning to focus and control and be a master of the things you can control, and letting go of the things you can't control. And just as you focus on those controllables, laughing through failure and joking and being lighthearted and not taking yourself too seriously as you become a master of those controllables. And as you are trying to master those controllables, finding those normal spaces where you can reach out for help to become a master of those controllables, and building confidence in those normal spaces so that you can go out and build more normal spaces for people like yourself, or people that are just looking for a place where they can be themselves. And finally, just like realizing that like the chair may be the biggest struggle and frustration for you, right? But there are other things outside, and so coming to peace with where you're at and what your perspective is can allow you to connect with others and use the chair as a medium to connect with others and to give others grace and to just make everyone's day better. Just like seeing a 5-year-old in Walmart and popping a wheelie for him and watching him giggle and run away. Like, so it's nothing for me, but that kid is going to talk about me popping a wheelie in the cereal section all week long. So like, just like those are, I think, are like the 4 like biggest things trying to distill the last 17 years of my life in, is like really slowing down and really focusing on what is important to me and how I can make those spaces for other people, like those normal spaces, whether it's coaching a track and field team, coaching a water polo team, just building out those spaces for people like myself to come into, where that weight is lifted off of them, where they're no longer different, no longer weird, and then we can start building their confidence as a group so that those ripple effects spread further. I'm at the end of my outline. Thank you.
Thank you, Coach Eric. That was a wonderful talk. Now this is the part where we ask questions. So if you have a question, just please raise your hand and I'll pass you the mic and you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was a wonderful talk. I'm curious because it feels like you learned so many important life skills through this journey, like noticing what you have control over, what you don't have control over, noticing how you can build a sense of agency over the environments you put yourself in, and choosing the people you surround yourself with, the places you'll go to create that normal space. And I think these are hard skills to just learn. Do you feel like, I'm curious, like, how did you learn how to do this? Or any suggestions that maybe these things don't come so automatic for others?
Yeah, like, I appreciate you pointing that out, because like I described it as it came kind of automatic, and I don't think it did, because like there were a lot of times where I felt extremely isolated, being in a small Central California town and the only manual wheelchair user like in the town. I did feel isolated. Like I would say like, I think I learned a lot of them through just like the people around me that had experienced hardship in one way or another. Because I think that's something that a lot of hardship has in common. That when you are in a moment of strife or panic or uncertainty, like the only thing you can do is figure out what you have control over and focus on those. You know, when COVID happened, that kind of happened like for across the world, where everything was a panic, everything was in flux, and a lot of people were like, what do I have control over? I can go buy toilet paper. They just, you focus on what is something I could do right now, But I think, yeah, I think it was like modeled for me like by my parents, and things they said, things they did, but I didn't really have a word for it until like going through like higher education and my sports psychology. They described it, and I was like, oh, that's the thing I've been doing for a while. Okay, that makes sense, And finding the people, and finding your spaces, I think really comes down to figuring out what gives you energy, and figuring out where you're wanted and where you're appreciated. Because that's kind of like my test now when I go to a new place is like, do I feel appreciated here? And if the answer is no, then deuces, your boy's gonna go find somewhere else to be. It's a little bit as simple as that, but I think having the support system of parents, partners, things like that can really point out for you where you're getting your energy from, because it may not be that apparent. I have been stopped by best friends. I have been stopped by my parents. I was stopped by my grad advisor, who all three of them at different occasions when I was making different decisions were like, hey, I think you should do this. When I was a high school teacher and a coach on the weekends, and my mom stopped me on a Friday and was like, yo, Monday through Friday, you're exhausted and miserable. Saturday, when you go coach, you're bopping around like an energy bunny and you're really annoying. You should be a coach, because obviously that's where you get your energy from. And, it needs to be pointed out to you. And they were all right, So having somebody you can reference, and if you don't have a partner or support system, you can just start experimenting, going to, an adaptive gaming event, an adaptive sporting event, like a support group, things like that. And like any place you leave where you feel lighter is probably a place that's giving you energy that's making you feel lighter. So there are a lot of physiological differences once you enter those spaces that once you're looking for them, I think you can find them. Like, did I answer your question?
Yes, very well. And I feel like I know I'm feeling lighter, and I'm sure others are, so we really appreciate you. Thank you. Any other questions? I feel like we have time for more. Yes, Joy.
Thank you.
Hi, Eric. How do you control the inner dialogue?
Ooh, that's a good one. That was something I was not good at for a really long time. I thankfully through through a good therapist, I was able to really figure out where that inner dialogue was stemming from. So if it's something like you're really struggling with, talking it out with someone that knows what they're doing is super helpful. But what worked for me, just like naming my legs, like giving that inner dialogue a name, and mine is Nathan. So like when I am I really struggle personally with being hypercritical of myself and really spiraling in negative thoughts and being critiquing myself and then critiquing my critiques about myself and then being negative about my responses to those critiques and then spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. And so once I noticed that pattern, named that voice Nathan, so that when I can recognize that I am starting to go into that spiral again, I can say to myself, "Hey, Nathan, shut up!" Like breaking that spiral of thinking, and giving myself an opportunity to regain control of my thoughts. It doesn't always work the first time. After this, I'm sure the hour drive home, your boy's going to be thinking, and Nathan's going to have to be told off a few times. But just giving yourself a sense of control over your own brain, because sometimes I feel like we don't have control over our thoughts and our conversations, that inner dialogue is really, really helpful. So if it's giving it a name or if it's giving yourself a cue or something like that, it's something to give yourself a finger hold on those thoughts, those intangible situations is really helpful. But if you're still struggling, like I did for a while, just having somebody that doesn't know you, that isn't associated with your life, to just be like, this is what I'm thinking about, and for them to go whoa, and realizing how it's not normal, and helping you work through those things is super, super helpful. Does that help? That kind of the inner dialogue you're kind of you struggle with, or is something different?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Thank you for that response and great question. We have time for another question. Yep.
First, I have to say I was so struck by how small of a percentage the actual day of your injury was in your life narrative, and how representative that feels of what you said early on about how you are not your injury. My question is how your support system adjusted post-injury and how that intersected with your experience of adjustment.
So how my support system changed post-injury?
Yeah, how your family and your friends adjusted to the new normal and how that interacted with your experience of adjusting to the new normal.
So I give my support system all the credit in the world, mostly because they didn't adjust at all. I went to a pediatric rehab, so I was nowhere near independent by the time I left. But regardless, like 2 days after I got home, so larger context, I have had the same 5 best friends since I was in the 6th grade. And 2 days after I got home from rehab, all 5 of them showed up in each of their cars and more or less told my mom that that day we were going to be figuring out how to get me and my chair into all of their cars in case any of one of them needed to steal me and take me away. Like, so it was just like, it was very much they approached it almost unspokenly with the same attitude that I did, where it's just like, this is still Eric. Like, he's still our friend. We're still going to steal him. We're going to take him, and we're not going to treat him any differently. So I was blessed with my first normal space with my best friends. Like, they treated me the same. They had more fuel for jokes, for sure. But that fuel for jokes, again, was more normal. Like, it was the first group of people I was able to relax with and vent to. And so I would say there wasn't a lot of adjustment on the social side. Logistically, it did take a little bit of understanding of what all goes into a spinal cord injury. Thankfully, my parents were with me, so they adjusted the logistics side of it, and they kind of made sure all that was set before I got home. The relationship with my parents did very much become more of a friend relationship a lot sooner than my parents did, because it went from very quickly from when you talk about your parents growing up, you're like, oh, they know everything, and if I need help, I can go to them, to very much the 3 of us going none of us know what's happening. So oh, Eric's on the ground again, cool, let's pick him up and figure out why he was on the ground. And it's we'll figure it out together, So that relationship did change to more of an equal footing. But friends-wise and that-wise, it was there was never a moment of protection. It was more of a moment of reassurance. And for me to really make that space normal with my friends, the hardest part was self-disclosure, of really opening up to my best friends and be hey, sitting down is the smallest part of being a spinal cord injury. I have to deal with, bowel routine, cathing, and medicine, spasms, all these other things. Thanks, Tyson, we get it.
I got a backup fan, I got you.
Hey, dude. Hey, if it gets bad, just hit me with that blow dart. Really calm it down. That moment of vulnerability was the hardest part with my best friends. But again, to their credit, they were just oh, I did not know all that was dealt, that's how being paralyzed worked. Okay. And then it was probably 5 minutes of them processing, and then just going okay, is that it? And then that was now a normal space where I could talk about it and I could vent, and it was normal. So there was an adjustment period, especially with my parents. But that adjustment, that awkwardness ultimately came out for the positive, because all parties involved were more vulnerable. And just like any helping relationship, vulnerability is key to building strong bonds, which is why 17 years later, I still talk to those same 5 friends every day. And I've been in 5 weddings since then. And they keep nagging me of when they're going to be in my wedding. And I keep telling them to calm down. So I'd say you have to cue that change, because that change isn't going to happen on its own. But being vulnerable, asking for help, things like that are really important to spur that adjustment. But if it's there, it's one of the most healing spaces. If you can have like a good home space, a normal friend group, where you can start to build out from there your normal spaces, because there's nothing more reassuring than going into a new space with backup, because you have people with you that are going to make that new space a normal space in no time flat. So I hope I, as I always do, I rambled a bit, but I hope that's helpful. Okay. Here we go. I've been hyping myself up this entire time. I knew this was coming.
No, you mentioned something about eggs. You still burn the eggs?
No.
No?
No, your boy
So
can
it's
make...
safe. So it's safe to get eggs from you now.
Well, I'm just saying, people eat my eggs and they're good.
Are they burnt still or not burnt?
Oh, no, my omelet's top tier.
I just double checking.
Dude, I got that heat on low. I'm stirring the entire time. Got the small curdle omelet.
Just thinking.
Get out of here.
All right, my other question is, you talked about swimming and being around the pool and all of that. You ever thought about rolling your whole wheelchair in there like that? Just go straight in?
I've done it.
Cannonball. You did?
I did it. Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it was, I got a video of it. I just need to find it. It was...
Dude, you got to show that.
Me and my best friends, it was the moment I got my second chair, we took my first chair, took the cushion off of it, I sat on it, and we built a ramp. Yes. And they pushed me as fast as a full sprint and just sent me into the deep end of the pool. Damn. I landed on my chair and a slow Titanic, like sank thumb up, like the Terminator, into the deep end of the pool. It's
all right. That's what I was talking about. All right, that's good.
It was a good time.
There you go.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I guess that's it.
That's a good last image. Oh, can I ask something?
Absolutely.
Really yes. Hi. First, I want to let you know you're really amazing.
Oh, thank you.
How did the transition with your brothers and you in the wheelchair? Was it like, did they feel as though that your parents were giving you more attention, or they accepted it and was more supportive?
Thankfully, because I'm the youngest, that so our family's a weird situation where we're a blended family. So all three of my older brothers are all the same age.
Oh.
So I have like twin stepbrothers and my biological brother. So they had all moved out of the house. So like I was the only one at home still. Like it was harder on my biological brother because he was closest. So he saw me in the ICU right after my accident, which, as you can all imagine, I did not look great. So it was harder for him to process the change. But ultimately, they kind of took it the same way like my friends did, but a little bit more blunt. As you would with family members. When I'm going to visit my brothers, they're like, what do you need? Okay. But
very supportive.
Very supportive in a brotherly way.
Yes.
Okay. But being older, there wasn't a tension between my parents.
Yes.
Yeah, and now my brother loves me because my nieces love me, because I'm the uncle on wheels that they know they can just push me into the playroom, and I am forced contractually obligated to play with them now, it was weird at first, but eventually normalizes. As I find my normal spaces and I find my confidence again, and I'm feeling able to handle my own issues. But it is important to say that can be a place, and the same with like your friend group, where you feel obligated to give attention to, but those are both places that you don't have controllables in those situations. So at least in the very beginning, right, you need to focus on your own space. And then once you've like got those under control, then you can start reaching out and like, rebuilding those relationships and stuff. Like there shouldn't be an obligation to it. It should be like a two-way street or whatever. Like I rebuilt my friend group before I reconnected with my brothers because I saw them every day. And that was more important to me than it was for me to make sure my brothers knew how to deal with me. If that answers your question, it's like it shouldn't be an obligation or a stressor, and it doesn't need to come first. It's like where you put your value and where you put your attention goes first, and where you feel most comfortable goes first. Because if I feel more comfortable with my best friends, it's going to be easier for me to make that a normal space for me than it is to completely start over with, if I didn't have a relationship with my brothers, to build a normal space with them, because I have no handholds there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of
You're
course.
awesome.